Our last topic is gender dysphoria, which is defined as an overwhelming feeling that you're the wrong sex. You were born a male, but you feel like you're a female. Or you were born a female, but you feel like you're a male. And often the feeling is so strong that you want to physically change your sex, which is called being a transsexual. This is very distressing for people. And many feel much better after they've had a sex change operation, which is not a trivial issue. Now, I want to emphasize this is not the same as homosexuality. If you're a male with gender dysphoria, you have normal sexual drives and you want to make love to males, but not as a homosexual. You want to be a woman who makes love to a man. So it's a heterosexual position, but it would look homosexual from the standpoint that, well, you are a male, and the person that you find sexually attractive is also a male. Now, this is a very controversial diagnosis and has been for a long time. We'll talk about that in just a moment. On the previous slide, you may have wondered why there was a picture of Cher and another person there. Well, the picture is of Cher and her daughter, who is now her son. Her daughter suffered from gender dysphoria and eventually had the operation to become a male. Now, the operation does not make a female a male or a male a female because that's determined by your chromosomes. 2 X's in your female, an X and a Y in your male. But it makes the genitalia match the gender identity that you have. Now, gender identity is particularly interesting. We don't know why little boys think of themselves as little boys. We don't know why most little boys want to play with trucks and toy soldiers and not with dolls, or why little girls are more likely to want to play with dolls than roughhouse the way little boys do. But it happens, and it seems to happen no matter what we try to do. Back in the 60s and 70s, there were a belief by many psychologists that there was strictly a cultural experience. Little boys thought of themselves as little boys because adults treated them that way. But in fact, the evidence was never very strong for that. It seems to happen automatically for most cases. In gender dysphoria, the gender identity doesn't match the actual gender of the individual. And there's a lot of distress about that. Our culture tends to expect little boys to behave the way little boys are supposed to behave. And often they will be quite cruel to little boys who engage in more girl-like behavior. Now, that's a shame, but it's a fact. Whether it can change in our culture, that's a debatable issue that we could spend a lot of time talking about. You may recognize the first picture as the one that you saw with Cher. That was Cher's daughter. The second picture is the same person. It's now Cher's son, after having undergone surgery. Most of the physical change that you see there is the result of hormonal changes. So long before you do any surgical intervention to change the shape of the genitalia of someone who wants to be a transgendered individual, you'll start out by changing their physical appearance with hormones. So for example, the first picture, when she, before the surgery, wanted to find out what it would be like to live as a male, she got injections of testosterone. And almost all of the physical changes that you see in the second picture were the result of that and that alone. You don't need to do anything to the genitalia. So the reason why males and females look differently have to do with the hormones that they have. So men tend to be more muscular than females because testosterone increases muscular development. Women tend to be more rounded in their shape because estrogen tends to increase fat content in specific regions of the body. The facial features, look at the two faces, they're the same person, but one looks clearly female, one looks clearly male. And again, it's nothing but hormones that are causing that. The surgery itself used to be extremely rare. The only country it was done in for a long time was Sweden, but now there are many hospitals that engage in this surgery. It's easier to go from male to female than from female to male surgically, but it can be done. Now, again, a male who goes through this surgery will never conceive a child because the male doesn't produce eggs. So the internal organisms that are associated with being a female, those aren't changed. And the same is true. A female that goes to a male may be able to engage in sexual intercourse, but that individual will not be able to produce sperm because they do not have the physical organs to do that, so they will not have children through the natural way. By the way, the norm with sex change operations is to insist that the person not only go through the hormonal treatment before the actual surgery, but that they live for a period of time, 1 or 2 years, as the opposite sex, that they deal with their friends and coworkers so that they are sure that they can live as a member of the opposite sex. So this was a complicated chapter covering 3 separate disorders and starting with an overview of sexuality from both a physiological and a psychological perspective. We then talked about sexual dysfunctions. Those represent inabilities to engage in behavior that is considered to be normal. Paraphilias were once thought of as abnormal sexual behavior. Here the person is sexually excited by and wants to engage in behavior that some people would consider to be abnormal. In fact, in some cases, situations that virtually all people would consider to be abnormal. Gender dysphoria is a feeling that you were born the wrong sex and a desire to change that sex.